circumstances under which you began working for the FBI? How old you were?
It was in probably 1967. I was with a guy one night, a friend of mine, and we were drinking beer, and we decided to go joyride. And we jumped in a car and stole it. And we were driving around the city of Chicago for 45 minutes and decided to leave the state to go visit a relative in another state. And we had an accident out of state. And prior to the accident, we had walked in a pool hall and was shooting pool. And at the door, you had to register your phone number and address. And we wrote down our names and phone numbers, then went in and shot a game of pool, and then came out and had an accident. And we fled the accident on foot. Messed around in the city a while, and then caught a bus back to Chicago. And about 3-4 months later, I got a call from this FBI agent by the name of Roy Mitchell. And he told me that he knew what I had done. And we went around a couple of times, and he said something like, well, you know, there's no need in you trying to bullshit me. I know you did it, but it's no big thing. He said, I'm sure we can work it out. And I think a few months passed before I heard from him again. And one day I got a call, and he told me that it was payback time. He said that I want you to go and see if you can join the Black Panther Party, and if you can, give me a call.
Can I just interrupt and have you start that part about joining the Panther Party? But tell me again how old you were, and that it was not he, but that it was the FBI agent?
I think I was about 18, 19 years old. And the FBI agent's name was Roy Mitchell. And he called me up on the phone and recanted the crime, pretty much. I tried to deny it, but he had the evidence, and he said basically it was no problem, that we could work it out, that I wasn't in any serious problems that he couldn't deal with. And a few months, three months maybe passed before he asked me to join the Black Panther Party.
Now, what did Mitchell ask you to do?
Well, he didn't give me any specific instructions at that point. He just said...
Can you say instead of he?
Roy said basically, just go and see if you can join the Black Panther Party. I understand they're recruiting Panther members. So why don't you go down to the office and see if you can join. If you get in, give me a call back. So the next day, I got on the bus and went down to the office of the Black Panther Party. It was located on Western and Madison. And walked in the office, about 3 or 4 Panthers in the office. And I think I was about the 5th member in the Chicago chapter to join. They had this big office building on this, and up on the 2nd floor they had about 5 or 6 offices. And very little personnel to run things, so positions, it was easy to get a position. So they appointed me as a security captain. That was the first time I met Fred Hampton, and he was the chairman, the spokesman for the party, and Bobby Rush was the Minister of Defense. He was Huey P. Newton's deputy, which was a top man in the state of Illinois at that time.
What did you think about the Panthers at that time? What framework did you understand them in? What did you thought about the civil rights movement? How did they fit into your understanding of politics
I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood, and I had very little idea of I was apolitical. The Panthers I had heard of only from a recent article, I think, that had occurred in the paper. Huey P. Newton had just been in a shootout with the Oakland Police Department, and one of them had died, and there was a lot of press about that. But prior to the articles I had read about Huey P. Newton, I knew nothing of the Black Panther Party. In fact, the day I joined, I was pretty sure it was just another gang, not unlike the Blackstone Rangers or the Cobras or something. I had no idea of anything about their politics.
What did you begin to learn as you did join, and what kind of information were you able to give back to Mitchell?
Well, almost immediately after I joined the Panthers, probably within 10 days, I began to realize that the Black Panther Party was a little bit more sophisticated than a gang. The orientation process, the attention they gave to the political climate around the country had me going there for a while. And at one point, well,
and also if you can look at me.
yeah, okay. They had, I think the first set of reference books I saw inside the Black Panther Party was the selected works of Mao Zedong, which I had begun to associate with communism. And it wasn't too long thereafter that I started seeing books like the Manifesto, the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx, and then the collected works of Lenin. And every night after the office would close, the Panthers would sit down and they would study these books. We'd go to political orientation. We would read certain paragraphs, and then Fred Hampton and Rush would explain to us, the new membership, basically what it meant and what was happening, and they drew parallels to what was going on in the past revolutions in the various countries, like, for instance, China or Russia, and it was drawing parallels to what was going on in the current political scene within the United States. So they were drawing associations between the revolutions in the communist countries, as I understood it, as to what was happening in the United States, and so I understood them to be a little bit more sophisticated than a gang. I expected that it would be weapons and we would be out there doing turf battles with the local gang members, but they weren't about that at all. They were into the political scene, the war in Vietnam, Richard Nixon, and specifically freeing Huey. Yeah, that was the thing.
Now you would, I assume, report this information back to Mitchell. Did he have a response? Did he react to this?
Well, initially, Agent Mitchell requested very little information from me. It was a one-way street for probably about 6 months. I think he was, in every meeting that I had with him, he listened more than he asked questions. The typical meeting would be, okay, what are they doing today? And then I would just tell him what was going on around the office in general conversation. He said, okay, and what are you doing? And then I'd tell him what I was doing, and then he'd make mental notes. Sometimes he took shorthand notes, and then we'd depart. He said, okay, just keep me informed. And so we had a very loose relationship at that point because the Panthers weren't too active militarily. Okay, they were politically organizing at that point. They were recruiting. At that point, the Panthers were trying to, they had speaking engagements at the different colleges and so forth. So we were in an organizing process. And there was very little criminal activity, as I could determine what was going on. Very little to report to the FBI, in my mind, because I felt like since the FBI was an investigative body investigating federal crimes, that crimes were what they were looking at. And so,
tell me a little bit about how you felt about working for the FBI. What motivated you, and what what ends you thought you were serving?
Well, in my community, the policemen were, it was the quickest way to gain respect. I think I grew up wanting to be a policeman, admiring and respecting policemen, although I always thought it was outside of my reach. My neighborhood was not unlike most people that grow up in Chicago. Most young people, we were very mischievous and did a lot of juvenile type, petty criminal type things, but stealing a car and all of a sudden having the FBI, having a case with the FBI, the thought of having really going to jail got my attention. And so when he asked me to join the Black Panther Party, and he used terms, he never used the word informant. He always said, "You're working for me." And I associated him as the FBI. So all of a sudden, I was working for the FBI, which in my mind at that point, I associated with being an FBI agent. So I felt good about it. I felt like I was working undercover for the FBI, doing something good for the finest police organization in America. And so I was pretty proud.
Welcome back to Breakdown Friday. Joseph Ward, Professor Carl Tone Jones, affectionately known as PC, is here. Pat not here because he's sick. So y'all send y'all vibes to Pat, the healing vibes to Pat, so he can get better. Be back next week. He got some boogers in his nose. He got to get them out. But you know, it's Friday. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, get in that comment section. We know y'all gonna talk. We know we got a lot to talk about. So this is a video of, if you don't know, this is a video of William O'Neal, and William O'Neal was the informant of the Black Panthers who basically helped to bring down Fred Hampton. And we got to hear William O'Neal talk about his experience. You know, it's not secondhand information, it's him. And, you know, we're exploring and breaking down the anatomy or the psychology of a sellout. So, because how he ended it versus how it began, right? But just listening to everything that William O'Neal said, like, you know, let's get funky on this piece. Let's get fun. We got to get into this. Throw out all the pleasantries and stuff. Hey, don't worry about stuff. I can bleep stuff out. Hey, man, look here. So, so it started with he and his friends doing petty crimes, and they got caught doing petty crimes by the police, and they really didn't do anything because they had it in their mind that they're going to use these cats as undercover pieces to infiltrate the Black Panthers. So when it was time for all of that to happen, he came to him like, hey, basically, look, I got all these crimes you did. You want to go to jail or you want to work for me? Then, because what he's saying, the FBI agent told him that you work for me, but then in his mind, he worked for the FBI. So they're using all of the crimes that he did to as the leverage against him, say, either work with us or you go to prison, basically. So like, I am gonna work with you. But then him describing the relationship, it makes sense for what he was saying, how he was saying how loose the relationship was between him and the FBI agent, and how it was mostly one-sided of the agent just asking one question and him just spilling all the beans. But that come from, like he said, he really felt as if he worked for the FBI, but also was kind of conflicting. It was not kind of, it is conflicting. It's the anatomy, the psychology of a sellout. It's the cognitive dissonance, because he's talking about how in joining the organization and being exposed to the information that the organization was learning about and was teaching, he could see that it was not a criminal organization, because that's what he said. But yet, because you feel like you work for the FBI, you still got to go in and infiltrate. Yeah, he didn't use the word infiltrate, but that's what you did. You infiltrated. He infiltrated this. He infiltrated the Black Panthers, and he basically sound like he's basically saying he did more than what he was asked to do because of that badge of honor that it gave him to work for the white man. Yeah. Hey, that's why I say if you build it, you must protect it, and you got to have the William O'Neal rule. And that, I know he ain't the first sellout, but he's one of the most prominent. You got to have the William O'Neal rule to be able to protect yourself from infiltration, because he also kind of, to me, he talks about how easy it was to get a part, because he didn't express that it was any difficulty to become a part of the organization. So, you know, what are your thoughts? Go in. Go in.
I just finished watching, well, not today, but last week, the season finale for the third season of The Godfather of Harlem. And I'm not going to give any spoilers out, but just it just brings us right here to talk about like I said, the anatomy of a sellout. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with a brother years ago. Where he said, basically, I live in North Philly. More specifically, I live in Erie Ave, right? And he was talking about, he said, it wouldn't be anything for one of these outfits, agencies, government agencies, or criminal enterprises to give somebody $1,500 for them to pop my top off, and they could live in my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
We have to understand that the majority of the Black community does not care about what a progressive outfit or progressive agency or organization like the Panthers are doing, because most of them could really care less about the politics of it all. Even he acknowledged he didn't understand the politics of it all. A lot of times, so a lot of times these guys, and criminals included, they come from two-parent households, middle-class upbringings. If you do your research in terms of like the biggest drug dealers, the biggest criminal enterprises, specifically in the Black community, most of the leaders would say, I didn't have a rough upbringing. I just had too much free time. And I was out there. I wanted to be out there with the street dudes who were doing things. That's what this dude was.
Yeah. A pretender, Ja Morant.
Right. Yeah, he was a pretender. But to go back to what you said earlier, he easily, first of all, he wasn't a criminal. And I'm pretty sure the FBI knew that.
That's why they could use him.
Right.
He was scared to go to jail.
Right. He was weak already. He wasn't about that life.
Right.
Because to even a street dude, that cooperating with law enforcement is tantamount to being a snitch. So they would rather do the time because their reputation, So what happens with these types of guys, they're the easiest ones to flip. And because they don't have any ties into the community, they weren't brought up in the culture, they don't have any problem with what we would consider betrayal. In fact, I don't even call it betrayal at this particular time because he was never one of them. You know what I'm saying?
They're not codified.
Right. And so let's get to the security aspect of it all. And this is why it says it brings me to the last episode of The Godfather of Harlem. And like I said, I don't want to give any spoilers, but Malcolm needed better security. He deserved better security, even if he didn't ask for it. Sometimes your job as security for powerful people, for people who can make a difference and make a change, those charismatic leaders, sometimes you have to go above and beyond to make sure they're protected. That means you vet who you bring in. That means there's a process that you bring when you bring somebody in. That means you put people through the rigors to make sure that they're on the level. Now, will some people get past that? Yes. But a weak person, a weak ninja like this dude right here, possibly would have folded before getting to the point where he was able to infiltrate and get close in. And I know people, we both know elders that were in the Panther Party. and I know elders that were in the Chicago branch of the Panther Party working directly with Fred Hampton. And they were stating, and he even stated it was extremely easy to join the Panther Party at that time because the Panthers identified the political struggle. That's what they
Yeah,
identified with.
He did say that they were more on a political spectrum than a military spectrum. He did say that.
Yeah, they switched it up. At first, the Panthers were race-based, patrolling police officers, police brutality, things of that nature. But as they began to organize more, they wanted to identify with the international proletariat struggle. So they became more political. And therefore, they started bringing in more members. And at that particular time, they didn't understand that the Operation COINTELPRO was in full effect and that they were being infiltrated the same way Malcolm was being infiltrated, the same way Martin Luther King's organization, SLIC, was being infiltrated. All these particular groups were being infiltrated. They didn't recognize that. And so they weren't prepared for the betrayal that took place.
So that's why, okay, two things for me. One, we need to, that's why I'm saying entitling the anatomy of a sellout. We need to understand the anatomy and the psychology of a sellout. But also we need to learn from the past and use the information. If you build it, you must protect it. So looking at William O'Neill, like we said, petty thief, really a good dude, came from two-parent home trying to be down, gets caught up with the wrong crowd, gets a case hung over his head, and now is forced to do something that he normally wouldn't do, but he's put in this situation. It's his freedom or selling out. Of course, he gonna choose selling out because he don't want to give up his freedom. Now he gets into this organization, sees the organization isn't a bad organization, but continues to do the stuff because of the case hung over his head. Now he could have made the choice to say, you know what, I'm gonna just be a G and take mine. But instead, nah, I'm gonna go ahead and continue to infiltrate the organization to the point to where the deletion of Fred Hampton, and years after this interview, he deleted himself. Because in the back of his mind, he knew what he was doing was wrong. Because he said it himself. Once again, he said it himself. From his analysis, being in the organization, they weren't doing nothing wrong.
Well, I don't necessarily think that at that particular time that he thought he was doing anything wrong.
Right, like exactly.
Before, and I don't think he was forced to anything. He made a conscious choice. He made a conscious decision to join the FBI, well, to become an informant for the FBI and to become, what do they call them? An asset, right? Because he didn't work for him. He didn't fill out an application. He was just an asset for the FBI.
But what he's telling himself that shit to make himself feel better. Because I do agree. He got to a point to where it wasn't something that he really cared about. Like, I'm doing something wrong. But in the beginning, after the initial analysis, he knew he was doing something wrong. So he had to convince himself, all right, I'm working for the FBI. I'm working for the FBI. He's telling himself he's working for the FBI. So he convinced himself now that he's not doing nothing wrong. So he can get to the point to where he really believes he ain't doing nothing wrong. So he can continue doing the bull he doing.
Well, it's like approximate the proxies, right? The being white adjacent.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Being a part of the FBI, he already said he had grown up wanting to be a police officer. Right. And I don't know anybody, even back then, black, that didn't look. Now, suburban Negroes, that's a different story, because a lot of Negroes moved to the suburbs to get away from the common everyday black person. So yeah, that was one of the things I picked up on right away. And that interview, by the way, I believe that was part of if I'm not mistaken, was that part of the Eyes on the Prize series? If I recall,
I don't remember. I don't even want to lie, I don't remember.
So because I do know that, and the irony of this all is that he was so proud to go work for the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover, and then when the second edition of Eyes on the Prize. He was sitting in the living room watching. He was the one being interviewed on the second edition of Eyes on the Prize, because the first one was featuring Martin Luther King. The second one was talking about the Panther movement and things of that nature, and other Black nationalist outfits. And he saw his interview, and his uncle said he just got up, walked out of the apartment, and walked on to, get this now, J. Edgar Hoover Highway, where he was struck by a truck. And like you said, self-deletion.